Hello and welcome to the Built in the Bronx podcast. I am your host, Maximilian Hill, and today we have a very special guest. Jay Woojin Yao is an audio engineer extraordinaire, and he is the producer of the incredibly successful James Altucher Show. Jay, thank you for coming on the podcast today. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I don't know if I'm special, but I'm good.
I think you're special, and uh,
Oh, thank you.
your work has really helped me over the past several years during this unique time of tumultuous change, and really appreciate you coming on. So, for the audience, Jay is the producer of a wildly successful podcast called The James Altucher Show, which has been downloaded
hmm
over 40 million times. Correct, Jay?
at this point, probably 60 million.
60 million times. Wow. So,
Yeah.
why don't you introduce yourself so our audience can learn a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Jay, which you already mentioned earlier. I'm from Malaysia, and the funny thing is, I came to the States trying to, win a Grammy because I'm an audio engineer myself. So I work in studios. I work for, I record music. I record post productions, voiceover, movie, and stuff like that. And back in 2016, that's when I met James. It's a weird way of meeting him, but yeah, he came on the studio and started recording something called podcast. I didn't know what podcast was back then. It's 2015, 2016. No one really knew what podcast was. And then I just started recording for James, and then I loved it. So I've been working for James since 2016, and then I started as just a regular assistant on the show, like very very beginning. It's only for maybe one episode, and then the second episodes onwards, I started become the engineer for the show, and then eventually became the producer for the show. But yeah, it's a wild ride.
Yes, a wild ride indeed. And want to follow up some questions. Uh, you guys have had some incredible
Sure.
guests, um,
Oh, thank you.
authors, entrepreneurs. So during the wild ride on the James Altucher Show, what are some of the most memorable guests that you've gotten to connect with?
I felt like memorable. It's an interesting word because it could be memorable, but it's bad. But it can also be a memorable, but it's good.
Well, give me one both, one good, one bad.
Good. Okay, I wouldn't say this is bad, but this is interesting for sure. So we have RFK Jr. came on in 2019. That was an interesting encounter because, RFK Jr. His stance, where he stands on politics, and you also know where he stands on just worldview in general, right? Like vaccine and stuff like that. So that one was interesting, and it was also interesting because of his voice. I think he has lost his voice. Then I wouldn't say lost, but he has difficulty speaking. Then, but now it's a little bit better because now he's running for president and this and that. So he's definitely better now. But yeah, that one was interesting, memorable in terms of like, oh my God, it's RFK Jr.
Yeah,
like
he's a member of
who
one of
is
the most
who?
powerful families in the world.
Yeah, probably his family probably worth the Kennedy is probably worth like couple $1 trillion, right? Uh, and then there's so many good ones. I just can't like you know. I think Scott Galloway would probably a very good one because he came on and he just give advice on top of advice on top of advice in terms of uh, finance stuff. But at the same time, right? Like memorable, it also depends what you are going through then. So I think Scott Galloway was memorable to me then because I'm maybe struggling financially. Then I'm like, okay, this advice was good, so it's related to me, so I remember it very well. But for some other people, it could very well be Jordan Peterson's or Tim Ferriss or Karim Abdul-Jabbar or Henry Winkler.
Yeah,
Depends on what you're going through in life then.
I met, or I didn't meet him, but I've read Scott Galloway's books, and one of the things that he
Right.
said recently actually was talk about money. He said, people don't want you to talk about money, especially your bosses. And the reason for that is
Right.
information asymmetry, because they benefit
Right.
from keeping you in the dark. And I've had bosses in my working career who said, if you talk about salaries with other people, you're fired, which is actually, I think, illegal. You're not allowed to do that. But
Yeah. Like,
uh,
yeah, it's just speaking about, you're just talking about money. Like, I feel like if they fire you other than you're underperforming, uh, I think it's illegal.
yeah, but what he said is, secrecy and not talking about it is for the incumbents, for the people who are already wealthy. And I think that's good advice. We
Right.
need to kind of change this taboo about talking about money. Um, Speaking of
Yeah.
the Bronx,
Especially between co-workers. Sorry.
agreed. Yes. Speaking of the Bronx, you've had Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, on your podcast on the podcast several times, right?
Once.
Oh, once. I thought,
Once.
okay,
Yeah, we
once.
did.
Yeah. So we're all huge
A couple.
fans.
Right. Multiple times is because James went on his show, so I met him multiple times, but he only came on once.
Okay. Yeah. So we're huge fans of Neil here in the Bronx. He was actually a
Right.
graduate of Bronx Science, which our friend Janayad is also a graduate of Bronx Science. So tell me a little bit about Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, he's definitely interesting. I got booped by him before because I was wearing a shirt when we were recording. We went to the museum of the planetarium. Is that how
Yeah.
you say it? Yeah. So where his office was, where he recorded Star Talks, his show. He have a show
Yeah.
called
Star
Star
Talk
Talks.
was great.
So we
Yes.
went on there. Yeah, we went on there, and then I was wearing a shirt. It's a power button shirt. I don't know if you know what is power button. Power button is like, when you turn on the computer, you have like this symbol of like a circular, and then there's like a line straight down. It's at the power button. I was wearing that shirt, and it says, "If it's not, have you tried restarting it yet?"
Ah,
So I
I
used to
like
work
it.
in IT, so I love this shirt. Yeah, yeah. Because every time people will come up to me, "Hey, my computer is not working." I'm like, "Have you restarted your computer yet?" They're like, "No." I'm like, "When's the last time you restart your computer?" They're like, "Well, maybe 3 months ago." I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably why." Yeah. So he saw my shirts and he bought me. That's how we met. That's my that's our greetings. He just bought me. He's like, "Are you restart? Have you restarted yet?" I'm like, "Yes, I restarted," and I still
Yes.
have that pictures. But yeah. So he was cool. He was really cool, and he was really funny. He's really um passions and educations for sure.
Oh, sure.
Uh, yeah, and yeah, but on the education side, I think a couple things has to change. But Neil is just great at like explaining stuff. He's
Oh,
almost like
yes. He's a
speaking
brilliant
as like a
man.
6 years old.
I think one of our
Yeah,
professors
he can
here,
he can dumb down anything
yeah,
that he
he
talks. Yeah.
one of his books, I think, was Letters from an Astrophysicist, and he got because he gets all this fan mail, and then he created a book about his that just was basically his responses to his fan mail. And one person, I think the person who wrote to him was actually in prison at the time. He was an inmate, and
Oh wow.
he asked him about, and the only reason I know that is because in the book he says, you know, he shares his address, right? And I guess the guy asked Neil, how are you such a great communicator, right? And I think his response was, you know, in college, if you're lecturing, right, you're just teaching a subject, that's lecturing. But communicating is learning a little bit about the audience's background, right? Knowing, trying to figure out
Right.
what economic class they come from, trying to figure out how far they've gone in their education, and uh, trying to learn about some of the problems that they deal with on a daily basis, and that he's like, that's communicating. A brilliant guy. We hope to get him on the podcast one day. But I think we actually have a professor, Matthew O'Dowd, who I forget, he's involved in the Star Talk podcast, Star Talk in some way, shape, or form. But interesting guy. So
Hmm.
so podcasting is at the intersection of technology, entertainment, and journalism. And you mentioned that you used to work in IT. Now I know a lot of our students
Yeah.
here at Lehman had previous work experience in IT, and during, I guess, the tumultuous times of the past couple of years, they came to Lehman because they wanted to maybe transition to something different, right? So tell me about your transition
Right.
from IT into the podcasting
Well,
world.
well, so like the IT one was interesting because I used to work in a studio, and the boss has multiple company, right? Studio is just one of his side gigs. It's like, oh, I kind of like music then. I want to produce music so that I could be cool. So he started this studio, and then which I work for, and he also has a marketing company. And I'm a person that loves solving problem, especially like computer problems, right? So every time there's issues coming up, I will solve any issues in computer issues in the studios. And he's like, hey, this guy's cool. This guy seems like know what he's doing. So he brought me on as an IT person for the marketing agency that he owned and he runs. So that's why I'm like, yeah, I do marketing, but it wasn't like, hey, networking or security and stuff like that. So basically just solving issues. So it's like a operations a little bit. But yeah, so when I transitioned into podcasting, it's when I was still in studio. So I was already like into podcasting then. But you can always transition into podcasting anytime you want, right? I felt like podcasting is the voice of the people in terms of like, hey, anyone can pick up a microphone, a decent microphone, not a bad microphone, a decent microphone and the right microphone, um, sort of cheap microphone. Then you can start recording whatever you want to. So that's why I always say like the podcasting is still on the Wild West because anyone has the power to do it and then they can say whatever they want to. And so far in the US, there hasn't been any censorship on podcasting yet. But if
Yeah.
you're in Canada, it's a different story.
How so?
Well, I felt, no, I felt, I think last year they passed a bill that if you are spreading some misinformation, even though it's on a
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
podcast, you could get, yeah, you can get taken down. I don't know how far the bill went, but I thought they passed it. But I don't know, like, have they implemented it? I have no idea.
Yeah, misinformation is a real problem. I remember a conference I was at maybe last
It
year.
is.
They were talking about using AI technology to, identify misinformation, which is a fascinating use of technology and
It is.
application of technology. And they were using it to kind of also, I think, identify bullying and hate speech. So
Right.
if you type
Yeah.
certain
Well,
words, it gets flagged and you can get, deplatformed like Trump did, or,
right. Yeah.
a lot of
Well,
people, controversial people, have been deplatformed. Yeah.
yeah. I felt like I think that I think there are misinformations and there are wokeness. Misinformations is it's definitely bad, but then anti woke sometimes not necessarily they're like, hey, this is misinformations, but it's just something that they feel like, hey, this is facts, so we just want to put it out there. But if you're in Canada, that could be taken down too. I'm not saying that I'm for one or another. I'm just saying that that's just what's going on in the current situations, current days situations.
Yeah. So I did a little bit of research. The median salary for full-time
Thank you.
podcasters is, I think, around $87,000, and there's a range. You know, I think on the low end 15K, the high end
Right.
164K, right? And then if you're a complete outlier,
Ooh,
like
more.
James, like James Altucher, it could be a lot more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
uh,
or if you sell your show, um, some people like Smartless, right? Smartless. I don't know if you know. It's a podcast with Jason Bateman and two other people that I can't remember. Smartless got sold to not sold, but they bought Smartless like a deal. They gave him a deal. Um, it's $250 million.
Jeez, yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, $250 million. That just happened last year. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
it is crazy. And when we started the Built in the Bronx podcast, I said the goal is not to compete with Joe Rogan or James, right? Because that's going to take years.
Right.
But I think it's definitely a way to put yourself out there, and I think
Yep.
I've met a lot of people through that I never would have met otherwise, and it has
Right.
drastically helped me uh, build my network and have meet interesting people, and ideally people that can help our students start their careers. So I guess
Yeah.
what
Look at. I'm just. Sorry. I just wanted to interrupt, but look at you. Like once you started this podcast, I follow you on LinkedIn. You have so many opportunities. You go to conferences. You were recently in Dubai
yes.
for some conference too. Like, was it like a cryptocurrency conference or
So
something
it
like that?
was
Because I saw like some crypto stuff.
yeah, it was the World Blockchain Summit. So I was invited by the CEO of a blockchain company called Block Convey, and Block
Okay.
Convey helps companies that have Web 2 technology kind of convert to Web 3. So Web 3 is, technology in 2024. And I guess a couple months ago, he said, "Would you be interested in coming to Dubai?" I was like, "Hell yeah. I love travel. Every time I travel, I feel rejuvenated and inspired." And
Yeah.
I said, "Sure, let's go to Dubai." And people said, "Be careful, like, you might get arrested
Yeah.
or
Dubai
all
is
these things."
great.
But I will say the law there is very strict. But because of the strict,
Right.
there's almost no crime because no one wants to get in trouble. And we had
Right.
a wonderful time. We uh, World Blockchain Summit was great. We met. They had like a pitching contest where like 10 companies were pitching like investors. So think like Shark Tank, right? And Block
Uh huh.
Convey was one of the winners. So it was a successful trip. And I got to say, they are doing their best impersonation of New York City. They are trying to build skyscrapers. There's like 400 skyscrapers there. Uh, we saw the
Oh
Burj
man.
Khalifa, which was like the tallest building in the world. I literally, when I was trying, I took a video of
Right.
it, and I had to like lean back to get the whole uh, to get the whole building in the shot. It was a really it was a great trip. Great trip.
That's when you use the panorama view mode on your camera, so you can just do like a.
Oh, that's yeah. That I should have used that. You're right.
You should have done that. You should have
Yeah,
done that. Yeah,
I
but
should have.
but yeah, that was great. See, like, what podcasting bring to you? You go to all this opportunity and all these conferences, and lucky enough, you sort of escaped from the flood.
Yeah, so I got there after the flood, but I
Oh,
had
was it after?
it was like a day after. So when we were landing on the plane, when we were approaching the airport, we saw some of the floods. They had kind of like contained them into this one area. Uh, so we didn't have to experience the floods, but uh, I had to deal with some of the consequences of the floods, and they actually shut down some of the public transportation systems because of the floods. So
Gotcha.
the remaining stops became really crowded, and I almost got suffocated
Mm.
on one of the trains when I was taking the train from my Airbnb to the convention. I got on, and then it was just people. It was just sardine can. It was like 10 times worse than anything I've ever experienced on the New York City subway. And people were screaming, and
That's crazy.
like I wasn't sure if I was gonna get out. And at the next stop, I just pushed my way out of there. And then I think I got off like 7 stops before I needed to for the convention. So I had to hail a
Mm.
cab. And I got in a cab with some strangers, and they ended up paying for my cab because they said I was visiting from New York, and they didn't think that I should have to pay. And I was like shocked by their kindness, but
What?
it was, I'm telling you, I gave them my card. And they said, "If you're ever in New York City, come reach out to me. I'll buy you lunch. I really appreciate it." But yeah, that's my story of how I almost died in Dubai. But I survived. I'm here.
That's cool. That's
So
cool. That's a great story.
yes. But it was great. I mean, really hot. uh, met people from all over the world. I think there was actually an entrepreneur who traveled all the way from Vancouver. So that's like the west coast of
Whoa,
of Canada. So I he said it was like 20 hours on the flight. So but interesting. It was a
crazy. 20 hours.
great trip. Yeah. So any advice for students that are trying to break into podcasting, and are there any like specific tools that anyone interested in starting podcast needs to know about?
Well, just note about the right microphone to use at the depends on the format. Which is crazy because I saw everyone when I started. No, even right now it's been like almost 8 years. Like everyone just using the wrong microphone for different things or use the microphone wrongly. And one tool that uh, I use it often. I use it all the time, and I literally just said in podcast movement in 20 last podcast movement in LA. I said this tool will become the industry standard at some point. This tool is called Descript. D E. Uh, I can't spell. Descript is like DESCRIPT. Descript. Did I spell it right? I felt like I spelled it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Descript is gonna be the industry standard tool. It's a text-based editing, so you don't really need to know how to look at waveform. You just edit the audio like you edit your Word document. The strength of the tool is not just about text-based. There's so many text-based tool out there. The strength is the collaborations tool. Let's say I edit one episode and then I can send it to you like, hey, Max, can you approve this episodes? And you're like, hey, there's some minor adjustment that I want to do. Then you can do it on your end. And then I can be like, okay, now I got this project. And then I can send the same file to other people like, hey, I'm working on this right now, but I pick out a couple clips. Can you work on the clips on this script? So they can work it on this script while I work the same episodes on other things. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So the collaborations is like strong. But yeah, this script for people that want to get into podcasting, look at this script. This script is gonna be I would say like the industry standard at some point.
Very good. Now I got some questions from our students.
Oh,
And
thank you.
yes, yeah, yeah. So I let them know about your incredible career, your incredible run on the James Altucher Show. And I guess one question is, what is the most valuable learning uh, that you've gained through this incredible run of yours?
Oh, experiment. As you know, I like to experiment with things. So always experiment. Always ask. Experiment is fun because we do this show for like James did this show for almost 10 years now, and there's no way you can do it the same thing over and over. So always experiment with things. So we have a sub series called Side Hustle Fridays. We just talk about side hustles. We invite people come on to talk about side hustle. We have one series called Wall Street Insanes. We just have people come on and talk about the like it was James time, hedge fund time, that when he was in hedge fund and all the scams they have seen. And we also have something called Good or Bad, right? You just have a topic come on, and then James and AJ Jacobs, which who has a book coming out soon called Living a Life and what is it called? Living a life constitutionally. So he live his life according constitutions.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yeah, they were just yeah, it's very interesting. He was holding a musket he was walking into a Starbucks with a musket. That was a fun story. But yeah, so we have that, and then we also have Hook on the First Line. We have a lot of different stuff, and then yeah, experimenting, always experiment not just on the podcast itself, also experiment in your life in terms of like, hey, I never walk up to a stranger and say hi before, but what if I walk up to a stranger, say hi, and then tell them some jokes, stuff like that.
Yeah,
You never
I've done
know
that.
how much opportunity that provide.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was fun, right? It was fun.
I
You
love
you
it.
got the rush.
Yes, it is a rush. Another question from our students. So Lehman College is very international, has a very international flavor. People from all over the world
Right.
are students here, and you yourself are from Malaysia, right?
Yes.
So Any advice to students just starting out who have come to the Bronx from places like Malaysia?
Okay. First off, learn how to be American. Well, because like for me, it's you know how people when they go to different countries, they are very keen on like I want to keep my culture, I want to keep all my identity, and then that is great. I'm not saying that that's bad, but you have to learn other people's culture. You have to learn how to blend in with other people. It's not that you want to copy and be other people. It's just that once you learn other people's culture and other identity, then you can sort of blend it with your own identity when you with your own perspective. Then you have the best of both worlds. You have the perspective of the Western culture or the Asian culture or everything else. So and that also open your eyes a lot more and open a lot more doors.
That's beautiful. I think it wasn't until I started traveling uh,
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't truly understand just how lucky I have been to have been born and raised just outside of New York City. So many things that I took for granted, uh, freedoms and basic things that
Yeah.
most places in the world don't have access to. Uh,
Yeah.
Definitely blessed. So, Jay, I think our time's about up, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the Built in the Bronx podcast. What's the best way for any of our students to get in touch with you if they wanted to?
Instagram is the best. My Instagram handle is JAY_YOW07. You should see my
Yes,
face on there.
I will share it on the post. So keep up the wonderful work on what I think is the best podcast on the internet, the James Altucher
Oh,
Show. Tell James I said
thank
hello,
you.
and
Yeah, I will tell James that you say hello.
hope to have you on again in the future.
Oh yeah, for sure. Next time it's gonna be in person next time.
Yes, yes, yes. Thanks, Jay. Have a good one.
Thank you.